Good morning, Eddie.
Good morning, Alex. Wonderful to connect with you again on our journey past the equator. We passed the center point of volume three, and these two chapters now are, in one sense, the most important and crucial to understanding what current neuroscience, mainstream neuroscience, is spending so much time and energy really to find out an answer to the third problem of consciousness. I mean, how does external input to the senses, which we all know about, generate an internal experience for each one of us?
If it does at all, because
If it
maybe
does,
that,
yeah, that's right. One always has to leave that option open. Yeah.
yes, we'll discuss today chapter 7 and chapter
Mhm.
8.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I was straight away, I mean, I must confess, despite how beautifully edited your books are, I use this to read them. So I'm so sorry. But this means that from already from the beginning of chapter 7, there is a quote, and I already marked that. So I would like to begin with that.
Yeah, sure.
If you can unfold this quote that says, spiritual guidance needs guidance.
It's really pointing, Alex, to when one puts out an inner call for anything, one is asking for guidance. And then, if that inner call is sincere and at the right time, of course, then one attracts the right person, forces, or whatever to guide you. And guidance doesn't have to be a person. It can be an experience, it can be a book, it can be anything like that. But I think, I feel rather, all the greatest of sages, musicians, artists have had guidance in their lives. I mean, you take the supreme example, Mozart, who his first harpsichord concerto at the age of 4, when his father caught him writing a difficult piece. His guidance was from, well, Bach. He was obviously inspired by Bach and all the great masters. So that inner calling calls forth the higher guidance,
Ah,
is what I was getting at there.
mm. So aspiration is invocation.
Yes, aspiration is a very important word, to aspire, to breathe upwards.
Mm.
And then you invoke to be inspired.
Thank you. Yes. All right. So into the chapter 7, anthropogenesis, the
Yes.
unfolding of consciousness
Mhm.
from divine self
Mhm.
into the human body.
Mhm. That's right. And how also the human senses have developed from this, we used the word last time, flowing down of principles at a higher level.
Yes.
And as always, with most chapters, I always try and show that the perennial philosophy, by whatever name, is no one's invention and everyone's treasure. So when we find such strong correlation between the Bible and the Sankhya philosophy of India, I mean, they weren't emailing each other. They obviously accessed the same divine fountainhead of wisdom.
And you spent many pages. I mean, these we were
Mhm.
discussing this briefly offline before starting
Mhm.
this recording. These
Mhm.
two chapters, 7 and 8 of volume 3, are heavyweights. They're
Yes,
really
yeah.
important and deep. And you
Mhm.
spend a lot of text in this chapter 7. Well, I like these words as I found them. Elucidating
Yeah,
and
throwing
and
light on.
then and then commenting on the sutras, right?
Yes, that's right.
I don't know how you want to do this. If you go for 12 maybe we don't need to systematically do it. And again, this is an
Well, if you
invitation
like,
for the reader, but
Alex, I can summarize the sutras and just quickly, it just came to me straight away asking for guidance. I've been thinking, well, wanting for years, trying to find guidance on this whole question of what we're talking about now, how to resolve it in some sort of sensible way. And at work, when I was working, someone came up to me and he recognized me from a talk I'd given, and he gave me this book on which
all
I
right.
based those chapters.
Huh.
So here you have an example, without sounding at all highbrow or whatever, of I wanted guidance on that, and I met someone who gave me this book. But then I had to do the hard work, of course.
Yes.
So the author Sri Yukteswar Agiri, who was the whose disciple was the great Yogananda, Paramahans Yogananda, who brought yoga and philosophy to the West. And the foreword to this wonderful book was written by Walter Wenz Evans, who is an American anthropologist so interested in Tibetan Buddhism. Now ask yourself, how does an American become so interested in the Tibetan and Eastern if he didn't have an Indian incarnation at some stage? So the four sort of sections of this wonderful holy science, the first one's called the Gospel. And the purpose is to show that there is essential unity in all the great religions, and there is only one method by which we may realize the purpose of our being. And last time you asked me, I think you started off, Alex, by saying, why are we doing all this? Why are we doing all this? And in the Holy Science, that wonderful slim book, it says that all creatures, from the highest to the lowest, in the link of creation, are eager to realize three things, which is existence, consciousness, and joy or bliss, whatever you like. And whether we realize it, as some do, by being billionaires and wanting power, whatever the means are infinite, but we want to realize this quality of joy. And sometimes we use very much the wrong means, but that doesn't mean every creature doesn't want to realize this. So the various sutras, and sutras means sacred aphorisms. If I just run through them for one.
Please.
Yeah. So the first one, again, paralleled with St. John in the Bible, deals with the only real substance in the universe, Sat, and why man of the material world can't realize this, but how it may be comprehended. The second one of the Gospel section, again paralleled by Genesis, affirms that man is indeed made in the image of God. Also, by God, I mean the divine, the consciousness, of course. And that is, again, something that the great Newton spoke so explicitly in his Principia. And Newton was obviously a tremendous Bible scholar and a scholar of other religions. And the third sutra deals with the dawning, the awakening of creation and manifestation. And the fourth one, the more difficult one, deals with the root cause of this darkness we find around ourselves by that darkness created by Maya. That very difficult word. Maya just doesn't mean illusion. It means the appearances of things. That things are not what they appear to be, and there is this veil of glamour that is thrown over the real or over reality, and how we may penetrate that.
Can we pause? Can we pause here, if you may,
Yeah, yeah,
or
of
you can
course.
continue about.
No, no, no. Yeah, definitely.
Let
Sure.
me be what an evolutionary biologist would do
Mm,
here.
yeah.
So, what for? Why throwing in this veil that seems to take
Mm,
us away from
yeah.
reality and give us just a part of it? Some may say a distorted part of it. Others may claim we never get direct access. I do believe we get direct
We
access,
can,
but
yeah,
nevertheless,
yeah.
it seems pretty obvious that we deal with appearances.
We deal with appearances, and here I cannot recommend more strongly the thoughts and the book by Jose Sain Nasser, who was the great Iranian philosopher. He was a physicist. He was also a geologist from Massachusetts Institute, um, and a well-known and world-respected teacher, philosopher, and scientist. And in his Gifford lectures, he draws upon this whole range of philosophy from all religions, Zarathustra, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. And his essential thesis is this, that knowledge of the physical and objective universe can be obtained through science, through the science which is based on the physical senses. You know, if you want the physical world, you access it through the physical senses. But the knowledge of the ultimate reality, otherwise known as God, can be attained only through what he calls sacra scientia, sacred science. Again, sacred science known as sacra sapientia, in Newton's words, the divine philosophy, the religio philosophia in Schwann's terms, all of these terms referring to the sacred sciences. And the reason for this is that the universe, as perceived by the human being and the human senses, constitutes this veil, which can only be pierced by transcending the senses. And all of the sciences based on the senses, uh, reason and logic alone, can't pierce this veil. And what he says, Nasser says, is the failure of scientific materialism to achieve the task of encompassing the real through the process of purely human thought is caused by this power of Maya, which exercises its illusory powers upon those who would deny her reality. Now, again, it's very good to correlate what people say with others. Now, Einstein, the great Einstein, I mean, he would know about relativity, wouldn't he? And he said he differentiated between what is real, and what is true, and what is really true, true and really true. So what may be true belongs to the realm of appearance, in other words, Maya. But what is really true deals with the realities behind and beneath the appearance. So then Einstein, as he would, comes with his seminal remark that the real truth is only known to the universal observer. So who is the universal observer? It's the supreme consciousness, or it's the individual who is able to raise his individual consciousness to the level of the supreme consciousness, to what the mystics would refer to as the knowing all state, where the boundary between self and not self disappears, to that state of omniscience. So whether we hear or listen to Einstein or Nasser or Krishnamurti or Blavatsky, they've all pointed out that one has to transcend thought, not deny it, not obliterate it, but transcend it.
So is Maya then, this veil, is it some sort of evolutionary spur, something that animates us?
It is, yes. And without Maya, there would be no creation. It is the very creative principle, but that very creative principle throws that veil of glamour.
Hmm. And it's fascinating because even the way we speak in science, even if we don't know anything about perennial philosophy,
Mm.
there's this notion that's pervasive of a secret, of a veil, or something that needs to be uncovered,
Yeah.
discovered,
Discovered,
as if there's
uncovered.
something in between
Mm.
that doesn't let us fully see.
Mm.
And then there's this impulse to just figure it out
Mm.
and uncover
Yeah.
that veil of
Yes.
nature, even of nature.
Yes.
As if nature didn't want to show herself fully.
Yes. Nature always wears clothes.
Hmm. Yeah.
But to see nature in her true self is something different. We see the clothing of nature.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for that. You were
Yeah.
going through
Mm.
the
Through the
sutras.
sutras, yeah. So then I think we got to Sutra 4 dealing with Maya, and the fifth one concerns the state of consciousness that either assimilates or rejects wisdom. And here you have this wonderful saying in the Bible that the light shineth in the darkness, but the darkness understands it not, and so rejects the light, so to speak. And the sixth one deals with, what does it deal with? The polarization of chitta. Now, chit is the omniscient consciousness. Chitta is the consciousness in the individual. And it deals with that polarization of the mind principle we've spoken of many times into the higher mind and the lower mind, and how this occurs. And when there is this polarization, which is one mind, of course, but functioning in two different ways, when there is an attraction upwards and a pull downwards, there is a sort of whirlpool in between, and that whirling in between, known as ahamkara, which is the sense of separate self, the sense of the ego. Sutra 7 to 10 then explain how the potentialities and potencies in the cosmos are mirrored in the causal body, the highest body of man, and the astral body or the other subtle bodies. Sutra 11 and 12, 11 concerns the idea of the gross material body, and Sutra 12 is an interesting one. It talks of the 24 elders that we find in the Bible, and the 24 elders are mirrored in Samkhya as the five gross matters, solid, liquid, fiery, gaseous, and ethereal, the five organs of senses, the five organs of action, the five objects of the senses, and together with the mind and intelligence and the heart make up 24. So, even though this sounds so complicated, which it is, of course, and the details are phenomenal, but the overriding principle is, I would suggest, quite simple. Our challenge is to put it down in words and paper.
And precisely that's something that always fascinated me about the sutras, because then you get, as you have in your chapters, but I read it also somewhere else, of course,
Yeah,
by
yeah.
great yogis,
So,
that they take the
mm,
sutras first, perhaps then they translate them, let's say, into English,
mm,
and
mm.
then they write a commentary on them,
Commentary, yeah.
and that seems to be kind of an exercise for them to continue expounding their
Mm,
own
mm. Unpacking. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
unpacking their own philosophical and yogic systems.
Hmm.
They are truly what we call in physics and in mathematics when you have this compression, right? Like the
Mm.
minimum description length.
Mm.
Like these are really intense encapsulations
Mm.
whose opening
Mm.
is well quite endless, frankly. And
Yeah.
you just rushed. I ask you to
Yeah.
rush
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
them, but
Yeah.
all these
But again,
movements.
what you've said, Alex, is what we were saying last time. We learned the formula before you sum the series. So it's like the algebraic formula,
Yes,
which you then
yes,
expand into the series. Mm.
yes. And all these, another thing to highlight, at least for me here, is I'm captivated by all these movements. Of course, we need to use verbs
Yeah,
to
yeah,
speak, but
sure.
you just these sutras. You just spoke about unveiling, and then the
Hmm.
rejection of the
Mm.
darkness of the
Mm.
light, right? And then the
Mm.
pulling, the
Mm.
polarization,
Mm.
the mirroring. It's
Mm.
like there's a lot of action going on. There is a lot of action.
There is a lot of action, and one of the axioms we were talking about last time is that there's ceaseless motion. If there isn't ceaseless motion, there is death, and there's no such thing as death. There's tremendous vitality, and the universe is teeming with life forms in various
Yeah.
phases
Yeah.
of their own evolution and involution. Yeah.
Now, a central one in general and also in particular for this chapter is
Mhm.
what you write here, the emanational emergence of man,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
then the emanational descent. I mean, these
Hmm.
two are key
Hmm.
again. And why
Yeah.
I don't get tired of you explaining them again because
Mhm.
they're so central.
Yeah, they are central. And this is where Nicholas Goodrich Clark explains it so well. And he was professor of esoteric science and hermeticism at Exeter University. And his untimely death was a very great blow to esoteric scholarship. And what he uh, really said was that unlike Darwinian evolution, which starts from matter upwards, the real evolutionary process, man has evolved by descent from spirit to matter, not by ascent upwards. In other words, there's been a materialization of forms until an ultimate level of debasement has been reached, of concretion, shall we say. So, in terms of evolution, what Blavatsky did was she showed how esotericism could assimilate evolution, but evolution only in the spiritual sense of an emanational cosmology, emanate to come out of, an emanational cosmology, which informed and affected all the various material and physical forms of creation as well. So this was a grand overarching scheme.
Indeed. Yes, which you try to
Mm.
depict. I wanted to draw attention to your
Mm.
figures, figure
Mm.
23, 24, and 25 in particular in this
Yes,
chapter
yes.
7.
Mm.
Well, we cannot show them, or at least it
Yeah.
wouldn't make a lot of sense because also they need to be worked out
Mm.
slowly and in detail with the
Mm.
text. Well, do you make how do you make those figures? I mean, this seems to be an irrelevant question, but it's such an effort in trying to visually or
It
and
is.
organically
It is,
display
Alex.
that play. Yeah.
Yeah. And in my um, acknowledgements, I mentioned the many happy and joyous and suffering hours I spent on a
Yeah.
Saturday in my local
Here's an example.
well,
Here's an
yes,
example,
that's
right?
the
Yeah,
one.
here's an
Yeah,
example. I don't
I
dare
knew
to
you were thinking of that.
yes, I don't dare to draw on these ones. I only use my pen on the text. But wow.
I use pencil, use soft pencil, yeah. So there is a long process of the of an impulsive vision, so to speak, But then you spend many, many hours going over it and refining it and asking yourself, do you mean that? And do you really mean that? And how does it relate to this and the other? But that diagram, all of them I did on PowerPoint, not on Illustrator, and PowerPoint's not the easiest tool to use for that. But I did it on PowerPoint so that it could be used for presentations.
Yes, yes. An encouragement to the readers, I insist. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So diagrams for me are very important because it shows the flow of ideas. You know, words get in the way sometimes, and I use the example in music. You can have one chord, or you can have an arpeggio of many notes, but the chord played together is a different, gives a different understanding of the music than playing each note separately. So the diagram provides that flow.
Yes, yes. May you comment on the incarnation of physical man, which you also deal with in this chapter?
Yes.
Especially, why do I say that? Because you're presenting this top-down picture of things, and we're so
Yes.
used to being taught the
Yeah.
bottom up,
Right.
and even the word, incarnation, we don't hear that often.
Mm.
But now, since and let's remember, this is about in this chapter anthropogenesis.
Yes,
So
becoming to being.
it's
But
how the man comes into being.
if you look at the diagram right towards the end of the chapter, where I put the Samkhya philosophy and the occult side by side to show how closely they mirror one another, and the
Yes.
incarnation talks firstly always of the flow down from heavenly to the archetypal to the physical. So first we start obviously with the heavenly, and what the occultists call the first macrocosm, which is the centers of creative force that are mirrored in the heavenly man. The heavenly man is the second microcosm. The heavenly man, otherwise known as Adam Kadmon in the Kabbalah, Purusha in the Sankhya philosophy, the archetype of man, the template of man, man not falling into sin, so to speak. And from that archetype, then the third flow down is the physical man and his various centers of force and action. So this is the plane of action. So we go from the heavenly to the ideation to the action in exactly the same way as in everything we do. We have an idea, we have a design corresponding to the idea, and then we have that realization of that design in matter, whether you're building a house, the idea, the architect's plan, and then the bricks. But then you also have to assemble the bricks into a form and live in it. And the fact that literally all the great philosophies, esoteric philosophy, talk of this central process, and science decides to turn it up on its head, it's just incredible.
Well, and it's sweet as well.
It's a
It's like,
scientist
well,
looking through Maya.
yes, well,
But,
let's
yeah.
try to do it from the other way,
The
upside
other
down.
way.
Let's see what
Yeah.
happens.
Mm.
I wanted to rewind to kind of the beginning when you mentioned, I guess it was Sat Chit Ananda,
Yes, that's right.
we now, of course, the title of the book, Unfolding Consciousness, and we follow also consciousness studies and neuroscience of consciousness. All right, consciousness word is there. Existence seems to be something that philosophers have always been preoccupied with. Ontology, being.
Mm-hmm.
We hear very little about bliss, about Ananda.
Yes, Ananda,
We could have a neuroscience of Ananda or Ananda studies, and everybody could be talking
right.
about bliss, but no,
Yeah.
why is that so?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these difficult words to find an exact English translation for the Sanskrit. But bliss is what unites the two polarities of positive and negative, so to speak. Now, I said earlier on that why we're doing all this, all creatures like to understand who they are, what their consciousness is, and to be joyful and promulgate the joy. And if Ananda, if bliss weren't also at the root of the creative principle, we wouldn't have creation in exactly the same way as for human beings. If joy weren't behind the procreative act, we wouldn't have human beings. So bliss in the sense of the joy of procreation, be fruitful and multiply, as it says in the Bible.
Yeah. This other quote from Whitehead comes to mind. I think somewhere he writes the triple purpose of to live well, and to live better. So this seems to be like this third aspect.
Exactly. Yeah. And bliss for the scientist, surely it's supreme bliss for Einstein to, after 10 years of struggling, have formulated in mathematical terms the general principle of relativity. The bliss for Newton was realizing the understanding of gravity. So it's the fruitfulness, the joy that comes from uniting things and seeing their product.
Yeah, yeah. Here as well, on moving to another matter, in this chapter, there's this final section where you write that we are composed of countless myriads of lives.
Yes, most certainly. Well, even at the biological. Now let's start bottom up for a change.
Yes, all right.
Bottom up. I think I mentioned last time I heard this wonderful talk by Professor Lorna Dawson, who is a great forensic scientist dealing with the soil. And her forensic expertise has been used to solve very high-profile criminal cases, from the soil on the clothes, traces of soil on the shoes and elsewhere. She said, I'll never forget this, and now she said it with great emotion. Here's the Ananda bit. It wasn't just a factual, dry, boring. She said it with feeling. Ananda here. That 1 teaspoonful of soil contains 10 billion microorganisms, more than the number of people on planet Earth, roughly 8 billion last year. So if the soil is teeming with life, for goodness sake, we are teeming with life. We are materially creatures of the soil. But it also means that we are composed of various life forms. So now reversing things, our moral, psychic, and our spiritual natures don't come from microorganisms. They are bequeathed by this group of highly celestial beings called Adyan Chohans. And their offspring are known as the Dhyanis. And the Dhyanis are the collective spiritual beings equivalent to the Elohim in Christianity. And they are the angelic hosts of Christianity, tasked with enacting the divine law according to karma. The task is to enact the divine law. They don't formulate it. That's the Dhyan Chohans, but they are under instruction, so to speak, to enact the divine law. And these Dhyani Chohans have evolved through the highest stage in many aeons ago. They've gone past the human stage, and therefore they are qualified to provide the higher subtle bodies of our current humanity. So our moral and spiritual aspects come from the Dhyan Chohans. Our prototype, our astral self, comes from the Elohim, and then our qualitative and physical are the direct product of the lowest grade of Dhyanis, known as the spirits of the earth, so to speak. So man is physically, beyond any doubt, of the dust of the earth, but his creators and his fashioners are many indeed. So
Well,
man could not just be created by the Lord God any more than you can create a temple without all the intermediaries. And this is absolutely central, Àlex, to this chapter and the next, that there are intermediaries that are the creative agents in this whole process.
Eddie, this is, and I'm walking by your hand here, but there's something in me that says this is hard to believe. On the one hand, most likely so, and on the other hand, it is maybe my scientific training that has bent. Say more about it. I'm with you, but and let me also, I hope not flippantly apply
No, no.
the Hermetic axiom here and say, well, in the same way we speak about microbiome, you seem to be talking about macro
Macro.
spirituome, the macro
Yes,
spirituome,
yes,
right?
yes.
And they both sustain us, are here now. We're composed of them. They're composed of us in a really strange relational way.
In an interdependent way. Yeah.
Yes.
Look, the best scientific sort of angle on that, I'll never forget attending a talk by Brian Josephson, the great Nobel cosmologist, and he put up a slide saying this: physics must come to terms with agents. Physics needs agents, not vice versa. Agents are the cause of physics. Now, in his terms, physics, he's referring to the physical laws on the physical plane. They are the result or caused by agents. Now, he didn't expand on the agents other than saying even Stephen Hawking agrees with agents, but completely backs off when asked who the agents are. So here you have the intuition of a great scientist realizing that the laws we see on the physical plane, which we foolishly call blind mechanical laws, are not at all blind mechanical. They are the activity of conscious agents. So if you put on a materialistic stance, of course, it doesn't make sense. But again, the Samkhya philosophy, the Christian philosophy, all the other great traditions talk of these intermediaries, archangels and Elohim in the Christian terms. And also in the Hindu philosophy, they're not just abstract principles. They are known as devatas, gods. In other words, conscious entities, conscious at their level.
Yeah, thank you for this remark. Because a temptation is say, all right, I'll entertain that, but I'll take it as some sort of ideas that we can shuffle intellectually to make sense. But no, you're saying the opposite and that at the same time. Yeah, they can be ideas, but they are agents again.
They're agents, yeah.
Yes. Huh. Well, a lot in it, a lot there. Should we move to chapter 8?
Yeah, surely, yeah.
Okay. It's called From External Sensation to Internal Experience. Maybe
Yes,
a gap too far, I'm not sure.
yeah.
Subjective perception and the objective universe. Again, this duality and how to weave it together. And there are many points in it in chapter 8. So let's just take it from wherever you think best
I
now.
decided to call this the Schrödinger mind sensation problem. And why do I call it the Schrödinger mind sensation problem? Because in his wonderful book, What is Life, he says that I find the scientific picture, he says, very deficient. Science, I'm quoting, science can tell us in detail how the waves of rarefaction and compression strike our eardrums and then a neurological process create that physical sensation to what we call an experience. But why? Why should an old song move us to tears? How does air on our eardrums produce an internal experience? And this is something that science has nothing to say. that we can see red, we experience red. Red has a wavelength of 709 nanometers, but we can only see a hair's breadth. This is the extent of our human eye, but we don't see nanometers. We don't see nanometers. We see red. Now, how is this? So this chapter 8 is really a further development of chapter 7.
And in it, you propose the idea of the neural transducer of
Yes,
consciousness.
yes, making the distinction between a correlation and a transducer. So if neuroscience wants to find a neural correlate, well, the correlate has got to be on the same level as what you're trying to find. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a correlate. It wouldn't be a neural correlate if it were on a different level. But a transducer is converting energy from one level to another. It still can be physical, of course, like acoustic energy to electrical, like we're talking now. So I'm suggesting that the brain in the widest sense is a transducer and a filter of consciousness, as William James put it so superbly, of course.
And in it, what's the role of sense-set experience, which you also deal with? And this is also very important because sometimes we attack materialism, mechanicism, reductionism, but there's another aspect of it that is really hidden, and it's this idea of sense-set experience, the idea that we can only experience if we receive all those impacts from the outer
Yes,
world onto our
yeah.
senses.
Well, we only attack materialism when it tries to step outside its boundaries. I mean, for goodness sake, we need it badly when our senses give us problems. So everything has its place. I mean, we obviously agree on that. But the first point on the senses is to reverse the idea in mainstream science that the mind is the product of the senses. It's the other way around. The senses are outposts of the mind. And the lovely analogy given in the esoteric philosophy and Hindu philosophy is the queen bee and the bees in the hive. The queen bee is the mind, and the bees in the hive are the senses as outposts from the central hive. So that's when one gets that orientation right, then the rest falls into place. And the other point to emphasize is always distinguishing consciousness from its vehicles or bodies of expression. As the great neurologist Sir Francis Walsh said, how childish it is to identify the instrument with the performer.
This is one of
yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, this is one of the many ways in which you try to explain something that, the kind of research that I and others are interested in, of course, including yourself, what's called extrasensory perception. And bear in mind that many of those things are defined precisely by what they are not, like this kind of perception that it's not sensory. And yet, despite metaphors and images, it's really hard to conceive or imagine, all right, so how should I be able to perceive something and have an experience of it if it didn't come through the senses?
Yes, it did, but it wasn't generated by the senses. That, of course, you need the senses. So, but it's the difference between the vehicles of consciousness and that which is activating those vehicles. Of course, you need the senses. And the senses are not just the physical senses, which are, well, obviously physical senses, but there are also senses in the subtle bodies, which are the real stimulators of the inner sense. So two of the diagrams I've shown are the
Yes.
one dealing with space and time. and the other one, this whole emanational descent.
Diagrams and yes, and tables.
Yes, that table summarizes the whole chapter because it is a difficult one. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, yes.
So that chapter, it starts with overriding considerations, of course, and that table has the heading, of course, the subject matter, and the intended purpose. What's the point of it? So the overriding considerations, then space, time, and what? Space, time, and the role of Maya, our good friend Maya.
Well, some of the sections here, different between consciousness and the forms of consciousness, emanation again, which we discussed in chapter 7, cosmic elements, the interface. I recall we discussed it also in volume 1. And and then this transmutation from neurology, or from neurobiology to consciousness.
Yes,
so these are themes that have echoes in volume 1, and especially in volume 1.
Yes, yes.
But here we see them under the light of this after going through the microscopic and the telescopic picture.
An important one is the interaction between divine mind and individual mind. That's an important one. And then how we go from perception to sensation. And as you then said, the transmutation from neurology to sensation.
It all sounds pretty alchemical.
Alchemical is a good way of putting it.
Alchemical, yeah.
Alchemical, yes, yes.
Well, like a sort of magic, you know. I'm showing my most naive side today, but this is fascinating, Eddie, and at the same time, it's difficult. It seems so obvious and so impossible at the same time. Sorry for sharing these contradictions, but it's like
no. The truth lies between contradictions. It's the current that flows between contradictions.
So is a conclusion then that we got, in the same way that we got from the bottom up wrong, upside down, and it's from the top down. Also, I feel like from left to right, instead of right to left, like how do we go from sensory or external sensation into subjective experience? And it's a reversal that solves the equation.
How do we go? I've got one of those diagrams which describes the first one is space and time, and the other one is the emanational descent. So if I describe that diagram, the emanational descent, it's probably best to start from that.
I'm not sure which one you refer now to, but perhaps you could describe it.
I think it's figure 30.
You'll surprise me with your memory. Yes.
Yeah,
It's this
is that
one?
right? Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, yeah. I think it's figure 30. Yes, that's right.
All right.
Look, right on top, as always, we have Satchit Ananda, or we have Parabrahm, divine consciousness, the unmanifest. But for understanding that in its descent, it differentiates into two streams, but not two streams, I mean, two aspects of itself, of course. First is the subjective aspect, and then the objective aspect. And from that horizontal differentiation, we then have the vertical differentiation. The first one is Shiva Shakti, consciousness and matter. The second one is Sat and Chit, the object and subject, the subject-object differentiation, which then produces that feeling of individualized consciousness in the heart, giving rise to the causal body. And then here come our agents all the way, the five cosmic elements in nature, responsible for the subjective side and for the objective side. The subjective side, known as the Indriyas. The Indriyas is a general term for the five senses, for the sensations known as the Jnanandriyas. So you're talking of sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, and then you're talking of the karmandriyas, that the functional aspect of that, generation, excretion, locomotion, manual dexterity, and speech. But that is the subjective side. But as always in this emanational descent, there is this correlation between the subjective side and the objective side. And on the objective side, you have what's known as the tanmatras, which are the element principles, so to speak, which are like how can I put it, like the wiring in the transformer that you need in order to engage the current. And that's a very, very crude analogy, of course.
And this visual depiction also immediately brings the notion of uniting the objective and the subjective, not by gluing them together in this dimension, but by adding at least one more dimension, if not more, because there's this current that goes vertically of both of them. So that's remarkable.
And that figure,
rather than making them one,
rather than banging into
they're
two aspects,
flowing down.
And that figure is a very, very simplified version of the figure you threw up on the screen a little earlier.
Yes.
When you were asking me how to produce the diagrams, that's figure 23, I think, in chapter 7. So when these streams come together at their base, so to speak, we need something at the interface, and that's the role of prana. That's a very important substance, for want of a better word, that is at the basis of a lot of sensation, the life principle, the life breath. So there is a resume for this chapter at the end, but if I can just give the very hopefully helpful analogy of the broadcasting station. You have a broadcasting station and you have receivers who see the pictures and sounds. Now, the broadcasting station is divine mind. That's not enough. It has to ideate divine thought. The divine thought is the carrier wave from the broadcasting station, and the carrier wave is, to our ears, invisible. And then from the carrier wave, we go, which is one carrier wave. This is important. There's one carrier wave, but it can go to several domestic appliances. So the one carrier wave coming into your home, you can go through 10 televisions or radios. So then that divine mind, through the one carrier wave, through ideation, can power several domestic receivers. So different visible and audible versions of the same pictures and sounds, meaning different mental images in individual minds. But all of these mental images are really, the projection can be taken up to the divine mind, which is why, however crazy our ideas may be, because they are powered, if you like, by the divine mind, our ideas mean a lot to us, even though they might be meaningless to someone else.
And speaking about meaning, also, this cascading onto several appliances.
Yeah, that's right.
Reminds me of synchronicities, which we've changed a few emails before about that.
Yeah, yes.
And these things that happen in the world that have these two sides, and maybe charge, better said, with a lot of meaning. I was wondering, Eddie, given, I must say, this monumental work we're discussing of yours, what are you working on along those lines? I mean, I suppose one does not write the book and says,
That's it.
done with
No,
perennial philosophy, but
no, no.
if at all, what are you grappling with? And I'm asking this now when we're far beyond the equator of the book, towards the end, and these chapters,
Mm,
one can feel, at least I can feel, that they are as intense and deep as they will get.
mm.
What are you struggling with along those questions? As a researcher, may I call you as an occult scientist,
Right.
which I think you are.
Well, the two things always related. One of my ambition is never the word. One of my visions, dreams, has always been to show the unity in religions because people talk so naively religions divide. Well, of course, religions divide. Anything divides if you abuse it. Uh, Getting married can divide people without being too facetious about it. It doesn't have to. It can unite people and create something much better. So one of the things, my dreams, is always to show the unity in the great religions and how they can point to a more ethical, moral, and efficient way of living. Not efficient, that's the part of science.
Hmm.
The other, the striving, if you like, is to show man's limitless potentiality and that in any one incarnation, only a fraction of the overall spiritual nature takes on the dream, as it's called, the dream of birth. And again, to show as above, so below, why that is so. Because if you tried to do everything in one day that you would do in a year, you just wouldn't do it. If you tried to do in 1 hour what you're doing in one day, you wouldn't do it. So, how can you do in one incarnation what all your incarnations are for? So, it's again to realize one's innate potentiality towards attaining that degree of understanding and here's the ananda part of it. And by the way, ananda comes with suffering, the joy of suffering, if you like, to procreate or promulgate that understanding, however cursory it would be or rudimentary in my case.
Yeah, I wouldn't say rudimentary, and I would subscribe to everything you've said until then.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Any final words or themes amongst
Oh,
the many here that you wish
well,
to? There's time if you wish to
well,
discuss
one
something
thing
more.
that comes to mind on a slightly different subject is this whole question of power. And a musical analogy so superbly given to us by Daniel Barenboim in his Wreath lectures that emphasizing the importance of listening. So in the orchestra, the trumpets and the brass are the heavyweights, yeah? They provide the power. But if you just had trumpets and horns, the sound would have power, it would have no strength. Strength comes from the violins, the flutes, and the other instruments. So each must listen to the other. Now, in our world, we're obsessed with power. Billionaires and dictators and presidents, obsessed with power. You never hear the word strength. So, going directly on from that, I'm saying that the totalitarian dictator, the power crazed billionaire, is the weakest man on earth. Why? Because he has no power over himself. And the only thing worth having power over is yourself. Power over others is meaningless. So in our world, we have a crisis of ontology, as Joan Walton put it so beautifully, that matter is the primary. I would add to that, we have a crisis of values, that we value highly the billionaire and the powerful man, despite his morals, despite his despicable behavior, despite the fact that he can have criminal records, if he's powerful, we look up to him. So we have a crisis of value. So real power is power over oneself. So the average person, and there are many of them, someone who has a family, who has health problems, relation is under stress because of work, because of all sorts of reasons, a sick child, but keeps the family together and lives a good life, is far more powerful than any billionaire in my book.
And these two other words, and there are more than words, came to mind as you were saying these. One is vulnerability, which I think we discussed. There's some kind of mysterious strength in vulnerability. And another one, maybe slightly more spiritual, is surrender.
Yes.
After strength, because you're saying, well, power upon oneself, but then what's surrender? It's kind of the ability to.
Yes, Àlex, I know what you're saying. Sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt, but
Please.
surrender is by no means giving up, lying on the sofa like a couch potato. Far from it. There is, we'll come to it in the next chapter, the beautiful poem by Goethe, the snake and the lily, where he talks about the danger of prematurely trying to force yourself into the higher worlds. He talks about drugs, of course, and all of that. And that can only happen when the snake, the lower self, surrenders. In other words, the lower self surrenders, but not just goes away. The snake forms with its body a bridge over the river. On the one bank, you have the world of the senses. On the other hand, on the other bank, you have the world of the spirit. That is real surrender, making your lower self the bridge to cross over.
Lovely symbolism. Never heard of that in that way. Thank you.
That's the great Goethe.
Yeah. Wow.
And Steiner, of course.
So that's a proper and timely invitation for the following two chapters, which we'll discuss very soon.
Right.
Thank you, Edi. Till
Wonderful.
then.
Thank you so much. As always, a great honor.
The honor is mine, really.